Hey guys and girls, Poketing King here, back with another TCG video. Today we're going to go through TCG players' top 10 best-selling TCGs of 2024. So this is purely based on sales data. So this isn't based on your favourite TCG, my favourite TCG, the guy next door, your nan. It's not about that, it's purely just sales data. So a lot of it is going to be very much player-driven rather than collector-driven. To go through the list, we'll start off number one, and we'll go through some things that I think are quite surprising. TCGs that I thought might be in the list, and some that are in there that I thought, okay, maybe that's a bit odd. So Magic the Gathering is obviously number one. We know that Magic is the most played TCG in the world. Pokemon has actually sells more cards and is more popular the last few years, but Magic is the most played TCG in the world. And that is very representative, especially in the US, by the TCG player sales data. So 2024 is actually a really good year for Magic compared to 2023. As you can see, the scale here, sales were better on TCG player at least. I know there was a lot of knock on faith the last few years with Magic, obviously with Magic 30. They did that booster pack that was like $1,000 and it had reprints, but they weren't playable, so that's how they got around the reprint policy. So there's been a lot of talk about Magic. Obviously they introduced play boosters as well, so some of the sets didn't do too well, like Karlov Manor. That I still see on the shelves here. I see stores don't even sell any, but some sets like Bloomburrow and Dustmorn have done really well. I actually am a big fan of Bloomburrow. Wilds of Eldraine also did well. I can't remember if that was late last year. But as you can see, the sales are here. So Magic has had a good year compared to some previous years. Obviously, we've got more universes beyond announced. We've obviously got the Marvel stuff coming. We've got Final Fantasy stuff coming, which will be quite interesting. And they've announced secret lairs for like SpongeBob. So they are future-proofing their product where they can't sell nostalgia like the way Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh can, but they've kind of got their ways around it. So, Magic being number one doesn't surprise me. Obviously, number two is Pokemon. Again, doesn't surprise me. I think, Pokemon being number two absolutely makes sense. If you actually see that Pokemon has also had a better year, but its sales aren't nearly the same as Magic. Magic is absolutely flying compared to all the rest of them. In fact, looking at the graph, it looks like Magic has outsold the next, probably all of the TCGs. But as I said, a lot of players will be buying off, TCG player, and it is a very old established TCG. As we know, it's probably the granddad of TCGs. So regardless of not, whether or not the game is popular or not in certain areas, across America at least anyway, it's going to continue its popularity. So Pokemon being number two, as I said, doesn't really surprise me. It kind of makes sense that it's there. So far this year, I feel like 2025 will probably be a better year. Towards the end of 2024 has been a really good part, but the start of 2024 was fairly weak for Pokemon. A lot of people didn't take the Scarlet Violet sets very well to start with. Scarlet Violet Base, Paldea, and Obsidian Flames. Even Paradox Rift. A lot of people didn't like that set when it came out. So you had the first four core sets of Scarlet Violet that at the time didn't perform very well. Now, some of these sets have performed better over time. Paldea Evolved is around 130 a box now. Paradox Rift is doing quite well. Scarlet Violet and Obsidian Flames are still kind of slacking a little bit. But they are kind of, at the 100 plus mark now. Whereas early in 2024, we had boxes you could pick up for 70 to 80. Because simply stores could not sell the product and people really didn't want it. They were still on the highs of Sword and Shield when you had sets like Evolving Skies, you had Lost Origins, you had Silver Tempest, you had some banger sets like that, and of course you had 151 has been a remarkably popular set, but of course it's a holiday set. And now we're moving into Prismatic Evolutions, and then we've got the Battle Partners set, and we're gonna have Team Rocket. And we're going to have the Unova, the Reshiram and Zekrom set. So, there's going to be loads to see in 2025. And I think 2025 is going to be probably a better, more consistent year. Moving into 2026, which is going to be the 30th anniversary of Pokemon. I can't imagine that it'll be a worse anniversary than Magic's 30th. But Pokemon always do really well with their anniversaries. You know, they always represent it quite well, I think. And 30 years is big, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. And in third is Yu-Gi-Oh! So I don't think people are probably surprised. That is the big three as such. You know, those movements can change. In terms of like global, it is Pokemon, Magic, then Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, a lot of people are quite surprised that Yu-Gi-Oh! Was number 3. I think a lot of people think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has dropped off a bit. Now, don't get me wrong, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has dropped off a little bit, you know, in terms of like global. But if you look at Japan, for instance, they've got Rush Doll over there. Rush Doll is in itself a separate TCG. And that's, you know, extremely popular. From what I've seen when I was over in Japan and from the Japanese rankings for 2024 and 2023, which, you know, I'll include some of that data in this video as well, so you can kind of get a, you know, a bit of a snapshot, not just from the US, but a global. Unfortunately, Card Market don't share that kind of data as of yet, as far as I'm aware. If they do, that'd be great. Maybe it's something that, you know, Card Market need to do. They do some data, but nowhere near as, you know, inclusive as, you know, TCG Player, for instance. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Doll actually was like 8th in itself in Japan. The Japanese rankings are very different than rankings outside. As I've seen, you know, a lot of places in Asia, for instance, Digimon is extremely popular in places like Singapore and Malaysia, whereas it's not so popular in the US and, you know, in Europe. So Yu-Gi-Oh's actually had a really good year. Obviously, we had Rarity Collection 2 come out, and we've had the Rarity Collection 3 Bonanza. And then, obviously, they've announced the next one that's coming out, which is going to be, like, in, like, 5 months, I think, in 5 even. But I've really enjoyed the open experience of the Rarity Collections. Edison and Goat format are gaining a lot of popularity, a lot of traction. Obviously, a lot of YouTubers, you know, people like Ruxin and Simo, they do a lot of content around the wheeled Goat and Edison format. And a lot of people really like that kind of draft. You know, you have the premises, you have a wheel and you spin it, and then whatever that is goes into sections. So it could be you get 24 packs of a set from 2004, or you have to open 4 tins. You have to build a deck from what you get there. So it's quite interesting. I myself actually really enjoy that style of content because it's very different. You know, it's quite interesting. I think with Flesh and Blood, that'd be a really good option. Obviously, Flesh and Blood's a mainstay of the channel, and it's, you know, one of my favourite TCGs up there with Pokemon. I think that'd be great if you had a wheel and it's like, cool, okay, you get Arkham Rising, you get Monarch, and you've got a build you know, open 24 packs or a box, and you've got to build a deck out of that and then, you know, play best of 3 or best of 5 or whatever, which would be quite interesting. But those kind of formats have really helped Yu-Gi-Oh! And, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had a really good year. Now, on TCG Player, actually has had dipped in sales compared to last year. Again, that could have been because Rarity Collection 1 came out, and it was brand new and shiny. So, you know, that kind of makes sense. And I think Ghost of the Past 2 as well came out. So, but the main sets themselves are very hit and miss. So next, we're going to move into 4th place. Now, any guesses as to what? It's One Piece. That doesn't surprise me at all. One Piece has gone from strength to strength, and probably one of the games that's had this biggest rise from 2023 to 2024. So I got into One Piece in August 2023, so around 15 months ago now. I'm basically running the same deck as I did when I first got in the game. That's that kind of inside joke with my locals that I still run Red Rush Zorro. I do have the animals in there, the chopper and stuff, so it's a bit different than it was when I first got the deck. But for the most part, it's Red Rush, essentially. But One Piece being 4th doesn't surprise me. It has had a monumental growth. A lot of people said the game wouldn't last. They said it would drop off. They said, oh, well, when they reprint stuff, the collector's going to leave and the game's going to die because collectors are the only ones that are important. And the game's still popular. We have a great showing at our locals every week, 14 to 20. We have about 40 people in our Discord now, which is fantastic. The game is still growing. Now, obviously, we had a few sets that I'm not going to say they were dud sets, but they didn't hit the hype. So obviously, PBR01 was great, fantastic. Obviously, you had the God Packs, you had all the manga reprints. That was something that a lot of people was worried about, but that was a great set in itself. It brought back a lot of cards, reprinted a lot of cards that players needed from decks, as well as sets. Obviously, OPO 6, OPO 7, OPO 8. I don't think they were the most amazing sets, honestly. They can be picked up fairly easily at retail, which is great. Now, OPO 9 is actually a really good set, and there's multiple manga rares again. So that'll be interesting to see how well that does. I think Mike did a video on that on the release date, so I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested to see how OPO 9 is performing on release. I opened a few packs on a recent video that's going to be up probably before this, which is a London card store vlog with my friend Dylan, aka UK Blue Eyes. But One Piece being fourth does not surprise me. It is a great game. It's really fun to play. It honestly is the most fun that I have with card games in terms of playing. The art's great. It's got the best card stock in the game, and they absolutely smash it. And even though Bandai, make a lot of games, I think that was the criticism, that Bandai make great games, but they don't keep them alive. So far, One Piece has, we're on OPO 9, so if you include the extra booster, EBO 1 and PBR 1, we've had 11 sets. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what we see going into next year, but there definitely might be a bit of a dip, and there probably was a little bit of a dip throughout the year, but in terms of like consistently for the year, the game's performed really well. We go into 5th place. 5th place goes to Lorcana. That doesn't actually, again, surprise me. Lorcana, again, obviously it's a big IP, it's Disney. There's a thing in common with all these games so far. They've got big IPs, they're big established. You've got Magic, that's over 30 years old. You've got Pokemon. Again, you had the anime, you have all the video games, the toys. Yu-Gi-Oh! The same. One Piece, the manga and the anime. Lorcana is obviously Disney. Huge IP that's been, dates back to, the 30s. So when you've got a game like Lorcana, it makes sense that it's done well. Now, there has been drop-offs in certain areas I've seen. Some of the sets didn't perform very well. Obviously, the first set did really well. Rise of the Floodborn was the second set. I don't think that did greatly. I know Inklands didn't do very well either. Then you had the, was it Ursula's Revenge or Ursula's Return? And then you've got the, is it Shimmering Skies? And then you've got another set that's just come out, I think, as well. So, I mean, they are pumping sets out, don't get me wrong. I'm not a massive fan of the cards themselves. I don't think the cards are amazing. I think some of the cards look really nice, don't get me wrong, if people can collect their favourite characters. I don't play Lorcana. I have friends that play Lorcana, and they still really enjoy it. So, it makes sense. And obviously, Lorcana, like One Piece, is a game that is family-friendly. It's very easy to get into. Obviously, there's a lot of relatable characters. So kids can do it. You can play with your kids. You play with your younger brother, younger sister, your cousins. So it's very much family and orientated, and it's kind of bridges the gap between a card game and a board game. Obviously, they got PvE in the form of the ready-to-play product that they have available, which I think is fantastic. Flesh and Blood, if you're listening, LSS, where's PvE? But Lorcana has done that very well, and it does bridge the gap. And it also is one of the games that has brought a lot of people into card games. Now, Lorcana might be a lot of people's very first card game, remember that. Because they might have come from board games, they might be interested in Disney, and they thought, well, actually, this looks quite fun. They might collect the cards, and then they realise you can win promos by playing events and nice playmats, and they think, okay, maybe I'll start playing because my friends are playing. And that's kind of how you get into it. And then once they've got into Lorcana, then they look at other card games and go, maybe I want to play One Piece, or maybe I want to play a more established game that is a bit older. Maybe I want to play Magic, or maybe I want to play Pokemon or Flesh and Blood. So again, that's one of the few that's on this list that bridges that gap. The next one is quite surprising, I think, for a lot of people. And in 6th, we have Digimon. So a lot of people are going to be going, Digimon, is that still being made? Yes, Digimon is still being made. It is still popular in certain areas, but this is kind of proven, at least in America, it's not dead. Now, I was in Singapore recently, and they did a 128-man Digimon tournament at a store. They used like the basement level. They used their store, and then it's at the basement level like a shopping mall or kind of shopping centre sort of thing. And they use that. They put the tables outside as well so people can play. So the game is, and that's one of the biggest selling games there. And I was quite surprised. But Digimon is still played. It is still a popular game. There are still scenes that exist. I think it's probably bigger in Asia than it is in, the West now. It's definitely dropped off a little bit. I think probably Bandai have neglected it a bit. I know there was a lot of issues with tournaments. I've heard a lot about the game, bad things about the game. But I think it just proves that communities and passionate people can keep alive these games. And, I think all power to you. I think I do enjoy opening Digimon when I do. I do open Digimon packs here and there. When I'm at events and that, sometimes they see them on special offer. When I was at UK Games Expo, it was like 5 packs for £10. It was random. I enjoy it. I think the alt arts look really cool. I've got a couple of graded cards in my display there of Digimon. I think the cards look good again. Bandai make good card games. They also make pretty card games as well. So I'm actually quite surprised, but I was also quite happy to see it in there. And I know a lot of people I've already spoken to already were kind of like, yeah, I thought this game was dead. But remember, we are in bubbles here. When we're in card games, we can be absorbed into a bubble. So, there's other card games on this list that might not seem very big because you don't play them and your friends don't play them. But in other areas, in other cities and towns and countries, that might be really popular. So it makes sense that exists, and we are in bubbles, and I think it's always important. And that's why I like traveling, going to different card stores, going to different events, not necessarily just tailored to the card games that I play and collect. I think I like doing a variety in it, and it gives me a perspective of kind of how card games are around the world, and that's really one of the main parts of this channel, and it's definitely going to be going moving forward, and you're going to see a lot more vlogs in card stores. I'm going to be doing all around the world, rather than just kind of the content you've seen already. Don't get me wrong, that's content we'll still say. These sit-down discussions are a mainstay of the channel, and they're one of the most important parts. But also, it allows me to gain more perspective, and I think, that might help, enlighten other people, especially with situations where people didn't think Yu-Gi-Oh! Were doing very well anymore, or Digimon. But we'll move on to 7th, which is Star Wars Unlimited. Now, Star Wars Unlimited is probably the newest card game on this list, as we've only had 3 to 4 sets. I think it's 3 sets. So you had Rise of the Rebellion, then you had, was it Spark to the Galaxy or something? Shadows of the Galaxy. I literally have boxes on my shelf right there. And they've had the recent set that's just come out, which opens some packs. Now, Star Wars Limited is a hard one because I think a lot of the reason why it's 7th on this list is because of the first half of the year when it first came out and it completely sold out. Boxes went ridiculous. It went over $250. Obviously, the second set came out. They did restocks and reprints. They have printed, they printed the first 3 sets already, and they said they planned the first 9 sets. Now, it is Fantasy Flight Games, so people were a little bit worried about this. Asmodee, who, own them as well, they actually took a debt of I think 800 million to kind of fund this card game. It is Star Wars. We've had a lot of Star Wars card games before. A lot of people are upset that the ones they had before have died and they weren't properly looked after. I don't know if it's going to be any different with this game, honestly. I enjoy opening it. I did go quite hard in the first 2 sets. Now, I still can't sell second boxes for the price I paid from Distro. So they're sitting at like £65, £70 at the moment, Shadows of the Galaxy. Now, that might not always be the case. But I always worry when a game comes out in the second set, pretty much after release, everything crashes. A lot of the legendaries, a lot of the single prices crash. Now, I am a single seller, so I cracked, a lot of cases for this, and release was great. And then after a week after release, I just kept seeing. Now, prices always drop. Don't get me wrong; they always drop after release. But the percentage that I saw the prices crash for Star Wars was mammoth. Now, some people watching are going to be like, well, cards should be cheap. The first set was really expensive. 100% I understand that. But here's the situation you have. So when you have stores and single sellers, right? So how do you get singles? The supply of singles is created by either single sellers or stores or collectors. The average player of a card game is not going to open multiple cases of a set on release. And they're not going to open multiple cases after the set release. They might open a case, they might open packs here and there at their store, But they're not going to be opening, 50 to 100 boxes of a set. It's not happening. Collectors are going to be chasing, the higher rarity stuff, so they open a lot of product. Stores for singles, again, single sellers as well. Now, what happens when all of the singles crash? Well, that EV is now minus. So there is no incentive for stores to continue cracking product. If they can sell a box for, say, £80, but the value of the box is around £20, you're not cracking that box for singles. You're going to be selling those sealed products. So that's where you have an issue, and I think that's what's happened with Star Wars as well. And I've seen a lot of local scenes die, and a lot of people that I speak to that played the game when it first came out don't play it anymore. They've moved on. Now, earlier on I talked about Lorcana being a game that bridges the gap between board games and card games. Star Wars Unlimited is another one of those. Maybe less so than Lorcana, but it still is quite prevalent, and it does exist, and I think it's worth talking about. Now, a lot of people that are interested in Star Wars that hadn't played card games, because, quite frankly, the other card games weren't advertised or big as much as Star Wars Unlimited was. Some people might be offended by that, because they were like, oh, the game was big. It wasn't to the level Star Wars Unlimited had on release. It had a big product line, it had all the accessories, it was working with Game Unit as well. Again, a company that kind of owned by Asmodee again. There's a lot in that kind of branch, same as like Altered and stuff, but that's another conversation. So it makes sense that a lot of people came into card games because of Star Wars Unlimited. It was their first card game, the same as Lorcana. Now, a lot of those people might still be in, but I think a lot of people that came in from other card games have probably dropped. It's sailed now. The ship has sailed off of that for a lot of people. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think the game's going to die instantly. I think the game will probably still continue to do quite well. But it's definitely dropped off massively, and I've not seen a game drop off as quickly as Star Wars Unlimited has. And again, as I said, bubbles. So it might be fine in your area, it might be great, you might sell out, you might have 20 people turn up each week. But for, every store that has 20 people turn up each week, you've got another 30 stores where nobody turns up, and they had to cancel events. Mine, when I was going, was struggling to fire events anyway, because they could only get like 4 people to play. So it kind of makes sense. I think the first half of this year carried Star Wars Unlimited, and probably the second half of the year was a massive decrease. 8th, Flesh and Blood. Woo! Okay, so Flesh and Blood being 8th doesn't really surprise me. If you look on this list so far, we've had Magic, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, One Piece, Lorcana, Star Wars, and Digimon. Every single one of those is a huge established IP with hours and hours of lore, characters, years and years, where it's been ingrained in your brain over time. I know these characters. Flesh and Blood is the only one on this list so far that is its unique own IP. It's also not run by a massive conglomerate company. It is run by Legend Story Studios, and obviously the creator, James White. So it is a New Zealand-based card game, if you're not familiar. It's nice to see it on the list. I'm not sure it was on the list last year. I was trying to find data, but I couldn't really find very much. But to see it, Flesh and Blood on the list is great. It really is an underdog story. If you follow my content, you know how much I love Flesh and Blood and how passionate I am about the game. I think a lot of people I speak to that don't play Flesh and Blood, that have played it, all agree that it is probably, in terms of playable wise, the pinnacle of playing a card game. In terms of competitive card games, it is the best. Now, the game has had a rough patch, and it has had a rocky road. Don't get me wrong. The game's not perfect. There are still issues, but the difference between these conglomerates and LSS is LSS address a lot of their issues. They're very transparent with a lot of things, which I really like about them. From the early on, obviously the game came out in 2019. We've just had 15 sets now. If you don't include the special sets or the reprint sets like History Pack. We have 6 languages, which is fantastic. There is tons and tons of events every year, hundreds of events each year now, through call-ins and Pro Tours and Pro Quests and Road to Nationals. It is just, and Battle Hardens, it is just, it is a great card game. I urge anybody that isn't involved in Flesh and Blood or wasn't in, or has left maybe to try and get back into it. It really is great. I was sold on the art, the lore, and kind of the mechanics of the game, and also James White and NSS as a company. I fell in love with the game kind of the minute my eyes kind of landed on it, really. So it's great to see it on this list. Obviously, a lot of people will buy from their store, from their local store. I don't think sealed really sells on TCG Player, honestly. I think most of this is going to be singles. I think sealed is something you get from your LGS because you get buy box promos. It is a game that isn't sold in places like Walmart, game stores. It is card game stores. So it is an LGS card game. It is meant to be bought, played, and collected in the Flesh and Blood. But Flesh and Blood is a game that has taken me around the world, and I'm going to be at Prague, which is going to be great. And then we've got, obviously, the London Pro Tour, which is fantastic. I could do a 5-hour video on why I love Flesh and Blood. I'm not going to, because I don't want to be too biased on this list. I want to give every game a fair shout and a fair discussion. But Flesh and Blood being 8th is fantastic. It'll be interesting to see where it is next year. Obviously, only the top 5 have the graphs where it shows sales this year versus last, which is a shame. I'd like to see, Digimon, Flesh and Blood, and the other games on this list, kind of how they performed last year versus this year. But yeah, Flesh and Blood is 8th, which is fantastic. Let's hope it keeps going from strength to strength, and let's see what 2025 has in store for us. So the next card game is Cardfight Vanguard. Again, so this is a Bushiroad card game. This is the only one by Bushiroad on this list. So a lot of people might be thinking, well, where's Weiss Schwarz? Now, I expected Weiss not to be on this list. It was on it last year, I believe, or it was on a lot of lists last year for sales. Weiss has dropped off massively. So Weiss is a really weird card game because it is multiple IPs. Every set is different. It is still big in Japan, but we had this massive raise of collectors enter the game, and then a lot of them have just left. So a lot of these high value cards have kind of dropped in value. Obviously, some have retained, like the Mai, but a lot of it has dropped in value. I've never seen a card game where the value of stuff has dropped so much. Obviously, again, I have friends that are involved in Weiss, Mike, and I kind of see what happens. Obviously, you've had a Union Arena come out, all these other anime-based TCGs, so it makes sense. But Cardfight Vanguard is actually really popular. It's the only Bushiroad card game that I see get played. So when I go into card stores, I actually do see it on shelves. I do see people, I see it on their list of events. Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Cardfight Vanguard, for instance. It's also a game that I did see as well when I was in Asia, not just in Japan, but in Singapore and Malaysia again. It was a card game that I saw that was quite prevalent over there. So it makes sense that Cardfight Vanguard is on this list. I have opened some Cardfight Vanguard in the past. It's one of the only games that I have very little exposure to. In fact, all the games above this, I have more exposure to. So I can't talk about Cardfight Vanguard as much as I would do the rest of these games. But Bushiroad are on the list. It's not Weiss, which a lot of people probably thought it would be on the list. But Cardfight Vanguard is still, it still has a place. It's still going fairly strong. Again, as I said, those core groups are going to keep the game alive. Those bubbles that are dotted all around, they're going to have their hubs. They might be playing at home. They might play in their LGS. But clearly there is still demand for singles and sealed because people are buying it. Now, 10th. I generally didn't know what to expect for 10th. But 10th is actually Dragon Ball, the card game Fusion World. So it's quite an interesting one. This leads me to believe that there really isn't very much in it towards the bottom of the list. I think probably Flesh and Blood and the ones above it make sense. Then the rest of it below probably could go in any order, let's be honest here. Sorcery could probably be on there. As I said, Weiss probably could be on there. Obviously, Union Arena's just come out in English, so in America only. It's only had a few months. In fact, like 2 months maybe. 2 to 3 months, I think. October, November, I think it came out. But Dragon Ball Fusion World did really well when it first came out, and then it just died. I think people realised it was kind of a simplified version of Masters, and it felt like the game was created purely just to get people to play Masters. You know, one of the members of my One Piece group that doesn't come unfortunately anymore, but he was our judge, original judge when we started our local scene. He was really into Fusion World Online, but he massively into Masters. And he was, you know, we always talked about it. I had other friends that was involved in it, but this really is kind of, I wouldn't say bottom of the barrel. Dragon Ball is a big IP again. It is a huge IP, but I feel like the card game isn't doing very well. Now, Bandai have announced Gundam card games, so I think that Dragon Ball might get canned. I've talked about it in the past. Games like Dragon Ball and Digimon, I feel like probably could be housed under Union Arena. Now, obviously, they might have to change the mechanics of the way the game is made. But I think that those two games, you know, at some point, when Digimon drops off more and Dragon Ball kind of dies, I think it would make sense for them to be both housed under Union Arena. It feels like having too many card games, they can't really be... they can't commit the time. Now, I know the One Piece team is going to be bigger than all the rest of the teams put together, because it is their moneymaker, and they will milk it, and it is their cash cow. But I can't imagine there's a massive team on Dragon Ball, honestly. I barely see it now. I barely see it. I don't see any events for it. I don't see it at stores. When I go to stores, I always look at their... one of the things I like to look at is their board, where it has all their events for the week. And you always see Pokemon, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of the time you'll see like Lorcana, Star Wars, One Piece, Digimon, Flesh and Blood, sometimes Vanguard as well. But I have never seen Dragon Ball Fusion World. Not since it first came out, at least. Again, the first set went mad and then it kind of dropped off a little bit. So, you know, it kind of makes sense that it is 10th. Again, it's still there. As I said with Star Wars, I feel like the first half of this year is carrying it massively. I think if we talked about the second half of the year, perhaps Sorcery might beat it. Obviously, you've got card games like Altered as well that's came out. I'm not really sure how that's doing in the US. I don't think it's doing great. It's doing okay in Europe, but I don't think it's doing massively well. Obviously, MetaZoo is going to be back. It's going to be rebooted, so the cards are going to be different. So it'll be interesting to see if they're on the top 10 list next year. Again, with card games like Sorcery, Union Arena, maybe the Gundam TCG. Honestly, and I want to go into we'll go into the little Japanese one. I think I had the data for it. I know that it was Pokemon was number one. It is on Poker Beach. Let's have a look. Here we go. So this is the Japan list, which is quite interesting. So Flesh and Blood won't be on it because Flesh and Blood only just released in Japan in like October. Pokemon's number one. 857 million. Is it million? Yeah. $857 million converted to USD in 2023. So this is the 2023 one. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was number two. Duel Masters, One Piece, Weiss, Magic, Battle Spirits, Shadowverse, Union Arena, Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duel, Vanguard, Digimon. Then you've got like Wixos, Build, Divide, and Rebirth for you. So a lot of those like kind of Bushy Road, like Aniplex TCGs. There was a I don't think the 2024 one came out yet. So we will see the 2024 one probably later this year. Yeah, this was posted in April. So April 2023 to March 2023, yeah. So that's kind of the sales. And it actually, this is as much as the next 8 trading card games combined, including Yu-Gi-Oh!, One Piece, and Magic. So that's how big Pokemon is in Japan. Obviously, Pokemon is massive. It is a titan. It is a conglomerate. And Pokemon is going to be number one for the next 5 years. One Piece, I think, can break top 3. I don't know. I imagine it'll be Yu-Gi-Oh! That drops out. I just don't think the growth that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had this year is enough. I think if One Piece continues as it is, I think it'll break top 3. But it's relative, right? Like, how do we gauge the top 3? Is it just for that year? Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic and Pokemon have been top 3 for a long, long, long time. For 20 years, really. So I don't think that games like One Piece will break it off long term, but we'll see. It really is in the hands of the developers and the creators of the card games. But it will be interesting to see. Obviously, Yu-Gi-Oh's been milking the quarter century air now for 2.5 years. So it's not really a quarter century anymore. It's more like quarter and a half century. But I can't imagine they're going to do quarter and a half century rares. But that is, the top 10 best-selling card games on TCG Player for 2024. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts. Is there any games that surprised you? Is there any games that you feel that should be on the list or you thought might be on the list that aren't? And let me know your order as well. I'm interested to see what your order would be. I generally thought One Piece would be third and Yu-Gi-Oh would be fourth. And I thought Flesh and Blood would be above Digimon. And I thought Star Wars would be above Digimon as well. So it's interesting. It's a little bit different than I thought. But that's the data there, and it is available. So it is interesting. I like looking at it, and all the graphs will be here, and there'll be a link in the description below for the article if you want to have a thorough read of yourself. Hit the notification button as always, so you can be alerted to when we put our next videos on. We upload quite regularly. If you want to become a channel member, I really appreciate it if you do. You get exclusive content twice a month, and you get access to content 24 hours early before anybody else, as well as a 5% discount on the store, which might be handy, especially if in the UK, for Pokemon releases in 2025. And as always, hit the like and subscribe button, and have a great day and a great Christmas.